They called it the day without gunfire. That first morning when the sun rose across a planet that had known centuries of strife, crowds gathered to watch what they hoped would be a new dawn. No parades, no ceremonies, just hushed expectation on every street corner and in every home. People peered through windows and browsed news feeds on their devices, anticipating reports of conflict that would test the new technology for the first time on a global scale. Nobody knew quite what to expect from the invention that promised to render every weapon harmless. Some believed adopting it meant giving up sovereignty. Others placed their hope in it like a prayer whispered under the stars. And no one could guess how humanity might change once every gun, every missile, every form of armament was neutralized. The technology emerged from decades of desperate research. Resource wars had intensified and turned once peaceful regions into battlegrounds. Economies collapsed from incessant arms races. World leaders, confronted with the possibility of planetary devastation, began to unify their efforts. An international consortium of scientists, economists, and sociologists was convened to find a way to remove humanity's capacity to destroy itself. They had tried disarmament treaties and delicate negotiations before, each crumbling under the pressure of mistrust. Technological leaps seemed the only recourse left, some means to ensure that even if a government tried to keep or develop weapons, those weapons would fail. Violently forced disarmament was no solution, but a universal and non-violent method might just be the golden key. The key came in the form of wave-based interference technology. Eventually named the disarming field, its architects discovered how to manipulate quantum fields of matter so that any device designed with the intention to harm would fail at a subatomic level. Rifles jammed instantly. Nuclear warheads, if triggered, fizzled harmlessly. Even the sleek fighters in the air lost all offensive capabilities. No isotopes would split, no propellant would ignite, no bullet would launch. The most sophisticated conventional, chemical, or nuclear weapons turned into powerless shells. The technology, once turned on, required no further human input. It functioned silently, blanketing the entire planet in a field that endlessly sought out the unique resonance of harmful intent in mechanical design. None of the inventors fully understood why it worked so flawlessly, but the results spoke for themselves. In early tests, governments volunteered military bases for trial runs. Soldiers stood by to observe the effect on artillery, tanks, planes, and missiles. During those experiments, each armed device sparked uselessly. It was as if the machines refused to do harm. Scientists studied the phenomenon from every angle, confirming that if a weapon was designed to injure, the field rendered it inert. However, entirely defensive structures or non-weaponized technologies were spared. Swords forged for ceremonies, intricately inscribed antiques, and tools that could serve dual, peaceful purposes were unaffected. There was no threat to everyday technology. Agriculture, medicine, and communication equipment continued to function normally. Only tools of violence were immobilized. The field was refined further to detect not just guns and bombs, but also emerging forms of weaponry. Any invention that carried a destructive blueprint or harmful energy signature was disrupted on a fundamental particle level. Those who tried to circumvent the field discovered that if you tried to shape raw materials into a weapon, you would fail. The metal refused forging, chemical bonds broke down, or software glitched endlessly. On the day the system was activated planet-wide, people crossing borders and everyday citizens felt, for the first time in centuries, that they no longer needed to fear the next barrage of conflict. Suddenly, it was no longer possible to harm large groups of people with mass-produced weapons. For the first time, war seemed truly obsolete. In the days following the worldwide activation, news reporters found themselves wintering in a silent world. Conflicts that had been raging for years simply stopped being conflicts. Soldiers woke up to see deserted fields, strewn with hardware that would never function again. Governments that had relied on intimidation to control their populations lost their greatest tools. People walked out of their homes to find themselves in a new era, uncertain but undeniably hopeful. It was a moment that embodied the serenity everyone had dreamed of, but never believed possible. Still, the new world would not be free of challenges. Humans had been shaped by millennia of conflict, and the ways of peace required learning anew. Not everyone was grateful. Arms manufacturers who had thrived on perpetual wars saw their fortunes evaporate overnight. Some tried to sue the consortium responsible for the disarming field, claiming disruption of commerce or violation of the right to bear arms. Yet courts worldwide began to question those claims, emphasizing that if the capacity for mass violence had become technologically impossible, what right was left to protect? The verdicts leaned heavily in favor of preserving the disarming field. The architects of the new era argued that a peaceful future outweighed any lost profit. Denied the option of war, all that remained for governments and communities was to engage in dialogue. No matter how vehement their disagreements, they had no lethal method to settle disputes. Yet human nature does not change overnight. Anger, envy, greed, those emotions lingered in everyday life, fueling new forms of conflict. Without guns, fists and knives threatened to reclaim the darkest corners of human life. The consortium, fully aware of that risk, had ensured the disarming field included a fail-safe extension for small arms as well. Anything that could be used as a lethal weapon, such as a club or blade specifically shaped for killing, was neutralized if it crossed the threshold from a simple tool into an implement of violence. It was a delicate balance, requiring near constant tweaking. A kitchen knife to chop vegetables would remain functional, but let someone attempt to use that knife for an attack, and it would dull or break in an instant. The system wasn't omnipotent. People could still hurt each other with their bare hands. But gone were the days of easily ending a life from a distance or orchestrating large-scale carnage. Resistance flared in pockets across the globe. Hidden enclaves that despised any form of global oversight tried to sabotage the network of transmitters supporting the disarming field. Some believed it was an invasion of their personal freedom. Others insisted that no technology could morally decide which items in a person's home were weapons and which were merely tools. These small rebellions relied on sabotage and cunning. Ironically, they could not use firearms to dismantle the system. The consortium was prepared for these attacks. They had distributed the field's mechanics in satellites, floating platforms in international waters, remote desert stations, and high in mountains, thousands of nodes crisscrossing Earth's surface. If one went down, dozens more would seamlessly take over. The sabotage attempts, though persistent, fizzled out. With large-scale violence defanged, old animosities began to fade in day-to-day life. The hum of global tension quieted. Soldiers, freed from old duties, found themselves rushing to train for disaster relief, infrastructure projects, or environmental conservation. Wars of conquest turned into efforts to rebuild communities. Political disputes still raged, but they relied on rhetoric rather than rockets. For some years, that rhetoric teetered on the brink of violence, but the invisible barrier of disarmament guarded civilization against the worst. New generations started to forget the fear and paranoia that once haunted their fathers and mothers, and, for the first time since humankind discovered fire, everyone had to wonder what to do in a world stripped of war. As children grew up with this new normal, their questions changed. Where older generations asked, "How will we protect ourselves?" young people asked, "What will we build?" No one saw the point in pouring billions of dollars into weapons research. Instead, resources were directed toward exploring space, curing diseases, and mitigating climate change. The planet itself began to heal as humankind's destructive impulses lost their main outlet. A sense of unity, though imperfect, gradually permeated the globe. Disarming technology had not abolished anger or heartbreak or the longing for power, but it had removed the bloodiest recourse. In many respects, societies learned to handle tensions before they escalated. compelled to find solutions that once had been overshadowed by the easy cruelty of a bullet. In distant corners of the world, some paramilitary groups tried a new approach. They began to breed genetically enhanced soldiers or experiment with advanced biological agents that might bypass any purely mechanical or energetic definition of weapon. This led to a second wave of scientific scrutiny. The disarming field was adapted, retooled, to include biological detection patterns. Anything designed to kill on a mass scale was recognized and neutralized if it fit specific destructive criteria. That required tackling the moral and philosophical challenges of distinguishing a legitimate medical research virus from a weaponized pathogen. Over time, the system improved, guided by advanced artificial intelligence that learned how to differentiate, with remarkable precision, between cures and curses. In the midst of this societal transformation, younger leaders rose to power in many regions. Some saw an opportunity to champion peace and direct resources to the betterment of the planet. Others saw the technology as an insult to personal sovereignty, but they lacked the means to revert to the old status quo. The rare extremists who threatened to tear it all down found no path to hold the world hostage. Leaders now had to rely on their ability to garner popular support, or at least acceptance, without the specter of armed force. The entire concept of warfare had been so thoroughly neutralized that political boundaries began to blur. Treaties were signed to consolidate cross-border initiatives. Clean water and triptide energy and advanced medical research replaced the arms race as top priorities. Still, the world was not without fear. Many wondered if some outside force, an extraterrestrial civilization, or an advanced rogue group might exploit humanity's self-imposed disarmament. After all, the system did not protect Earth from external threats that were not designed on this planet. A handful of visionary scientists and leaders suggested a single global defensive system, distinct from the old idea of militarized states, not an offensive arsenal, but a planetary shield that would stop any incoming threat without attacking it. They hoped to extend the principles of the disarming field into space, forming an umbrella of peace around the planet. This time, the impetus was not to kill or dominate, but to protect. Embarking on that project required unprecedented international collaboration. When the first design for a planetary shield was unveiled, doubts emerged again. What if the shield was turned into a weapon? Could it be used to enforce tyranny? Could the same quantum manipulation be used to smother entire populations? The consortium faced these uneasy questions with transparency. They opened their international laboratories to inspection, published research, and invited monitors from around the globe. Their vow was simple. The technology would remain purely defensive, relying on passive reflection or neutralization of incoming energies. Gaining the system would allow for no repurposing into an offensive armament. Skeptics remained, but the slow unveiling of each test and the continuing success of the planetary disarming field lent the project credibility. One by one, governments endorsed the plan. Construction of the planetary shield commenced. Great segments of it were established in orbit, anchored by satellites and space stations. Instruments beyond Earth's atmosphere needed thorough reconfiguration to harmonize with the disarming field's frequencies, ensuring no accidental interference. The months rolled by with minor mishaps, but steady progress. Watching from mission control centers scattered across various continents, families and school children witnessed history in the making. Already, Earth had rid itself of warlike capabilities, and soon it would guard against cosmic threats without lifting so much as a single missile. This time, the shield would rely on the same principle behind the disarming field. Neutralize recognized harm without unleashing destructive force. World media outlets covered not just the mechanical aspects, but also the societal implications. Civilians initially feared a world governed entirely by technology that interpreted harm through invisible algorithms. Philosophical debates raged over the question, were governments relinquishing too much control to machines? Yet, the alternative was unthinkable, returning to a planet armed to the teeth. always one trigger away from nuclear annihilation. Gradually, through open forums, educational campaigns, and collaborative summits broadcast globally, the architects of the New World climate showed that technology, for once, aligned with an ethic of preserving life rather than expanding power. All the while, at the micro level, communities learned to navigate conflicts with words and reason instead of force. Arguments over territory, resources, or ideology did not vanish, but violence no longer was the deciding factor. Peacekeepers and mediators began to replace soldiers on the ground. Academies for diplomacy flourished. Social media channels were flooded with calls for civility as raw aggression remained but had lost its explosiveness. A fight in a crowded street could still happen, but it ended quickly when neither side could employ lethal means. Rage cooled without the adrenaline of brandishing a weapon. People who once lived in terror from daily mortar shelling started the slow process of restoring their livelihoods. Grudges took years to mend, but at least the path to reconciliation was open. Among the consortium's leading minds was Nyasha Efieni, a physicist who had helped devise the quantum resonance that recognized an object's intended use. In interviews, she explained how the field did not read thoughts, rather, it recognized lethal design patterns etched into a device's molecular architecture, the shape of a gun barrel, the chain reaction triggers of bombs, or the infection pathways of engineered viruses. Nyasha believed they had merely unlocked a fundamental principle, life-protecting logic embedded in the universe that humans had overlooked in their rush to innovate ways of killing. Journalists questioned if that was mystical nonsense or legitimate science, but the results were undeniable. Nyasha's name became legendary for forging, with her colleagues, the blueprint that halted all wars. Peace across Earth had a cascading effect on how people viewed themselves. A sense of shared, planet-wide identity began to blossom. Certainly language and cultural distinctions persisted, but people increasingly felt that everyone was in the same boat. Economies rebounded from the reallocation of military budgets to education, healthcare, and infrastructure. International tourism thrived. Borders that once bristled with fences and armed checkpoints became open avenues for cultural exchange. The old prejudice that one country was evil and another righteous lost traction when unstoppable violence was no longer an option. Neighbors who once cowered behind fortresses embarked on joint projects to clean rivers, restore forests, and preserve biodiversity. The peace dividend, as economists called it, was immeasurable. But while large-scale conflict was eradicated, new tensions arose in unexpected ways. With humankind's destructive capacity neutralized, certain individuals tried to exploit the new environment for psychological or social power. Hackers threatened to sabotage water supplies, hijack communication networks, or manipulate the data that fed local governments. Fraud schemes multiplied, and corruption took on new digital forms. Educational initiatives prioritized cybersecurity and digital ethics, reminding society that eradicating guns did not mean eradicating greed. Some of the biggest crimes became data breaches or manipulations, exposing vulnerabilities that humans had once neglected while they poured energy into violent arsenals. Gradually, the consortium realized that promoting skillful dialogue and strong digital infrastructure was just as crucial as neutralizing physical weapons. Even as the generations born before the day without gunfire aged, they grappled with the lingering trauma of a more brutal past. Veterans who had seen active combat found it challenging to adapt to a world that no longer needed their skills in war. Some took up roles in historical preservation, telling cautionary tales so that the new generations might learn from the mistakes of their predecessors. Museums dedicated to war history expanded with new interactive exhibits, reminding visitors of what humanity had endured. The stark difference between the old times and the new order of life left many in awe, and sometimes in grief for those who had not lived to see this era. Gradually, humanity turned its gaze outward with renewed curiosity. Freed from the cycle of conflict, exploration became an irresistible mandate. Spaceports flourished as people launched missions to the Moon, Mars, and beyond, no longer burdened by the division of resources for war. Multinational crews ventured further than any single nation had gone before. Alongside new habitats on distant worlds, they carried with them the code for the disarming field. It would not do to allow old ways to fester on newly settled planets. Great debates ensued on whether it was moral to place the field on other worlds, but the consensus was that if humans had learned anything from their bloody history, it was that violence did not lead to genuine progress. One day, a distant star system's signals reached Earth. Astronomers long suspected the presence of advanced life in the cosmos, but no conclusive proof had yet emerged. The signals were faint, uncertain, but they triggered excitement and anxiety. A first contact scenario, if and when it happened, could decide the future of humankind. Some officials feared that an alien civilization might bristle at Earth's universal disarmament, seeing it as a sign of weakness. Others insisted that it might mark the pinnacle of humanity's moral evolution, a stance that could invite closer friendship with the stars. As the planet prepared for an eventual meeting with the unknown, it was the disarming field that reassured billions of people. They had built a global society in which war was technologically unthinkable, so it was less likely an interstellar conflict would begin with the crackle of gunfire from humanity. Nearly a decade after the day without gunfire, a grand ceremony was held on the dusty plains of a once-contested region known for centuries of warfare. Leaders from all continents gathered there, ironically overshadowed by a calm sky. They stood alongside peacekeepers, families, educators, technicians who had maintained the field's infrastructure, and children whose eyes shimmered with a future unburdened by old animosities. Although military parades did not exist anymore, they found ways to celebrate. The event featured cultural displays from every corner of the planet, intermingling music, dance, and art forms that told the human story. Elders recounted emphatically that just one generation prior, such a gathering would have been unthinkable, risking retaliation or sabotage. Now it was a living testament to what people could achieve when the weapons were set aside once and for all. Across the plains stood the relics of ancient fortresses and the rubble of modern bunkers, quietly reminding everyone of the suffering that once marked the land. During the final portion of the gathering, visitors strolled among the remains, reading plaques describing each site's history of war. No propaganda overshadowed the simple facts. How many lives were lost beneath those walls? How many families displaced? How many minds scarred? And they read how those tragedies ended, not because of an ultimate weapon that forced surrender, but because of a technology that ensured there could be no more weapons. In that stark symbolism lay the essence of humanity's transformation. Amid the crowd was an older soldier from a bygone conflict. He had seen atrocities that scarred his memory. He stood quietly, listening to laughter echo across the grounds that once shook with artillery. He recalled how he used to believe peace must be won through deterrence and superior firepower. Yet here he was, living proof that, given a universal guarantee of disarmament, enemies could coexist. He looked over at a small child, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, holding a bright banner. The words read, "Everyone belongs on Earth. Peace is our birthright." The soldier felt tears in his eyes. He never expected to witness such a day when the same soils that had devoured the blood of countless battles became a place for children to play. That evening, the assembled leaders made speeches broadcast worldwide. They celebrated expansion into space, the unveiling of new cultural institutions, and encouraged vigilant protection of the technology that had brought them there. They did not, however, speak of triumph or conquest. Instead, they spoke of gratitude for the day science and compassion joined forces to ensure that no child would die by a bullet or bomb again. Some orators dedicated their words to the memory of those who had perished in the long ages of war. Eskander Barrios, a historian turned diplomat, expressed that the disarming field was not just a miracle, but a responsibility. The moment we unplug it, or stand idle while it falls into disrepair, he said, we invite the darkest parts of ourselves to return. It is not enough to remove the instruments of violence. We must mend the hearts that once wielded them. People watched in real time from every inhabited corner of the planet. Despite the differences in language or culture, the central message resonated. Peace was now the default. War had become an anomaly, a relic of the past that children would only learn about through documentaries and exhibitions. As the sun set and shadows stretched across the old battlefield, a hush fell over the crowd. A symbolic gesture concluded the ceremony. An ancient sword, centuries old but once used to terrorize entire villages, had been placed within the field's resonance generator. A switch was flipped, the crowd collectively holding their breaths, many expecting some bright theatrical effect. But there was no flash, no thunderclap. The sword quietly disintegrated into harmless particulate, a final reflection of the technology's power. The hush broke into applause that rang out for miles. After the ceremony ended, people milled around, discussing the future. Freed from the immediate threat of destruction, humankind faced countless social, economic, and existential questions. Without war, what became of heroism, sacrifice, and patriotism? How would nations maintain unity without external enemies? If violence was no longer a fear, how did societies keep their people motivated to overcome inertia, solve pressing problems, and explore the unknown? Philosophers wrestled with whether humanity's creative spark was in some way tied to conflict, or whether it could thrive in a new era of constant collaboration. In the fullness of time, answers emerged gradually, shaped by a generation that regarded mutual progress as the highest calling. As the calendar turned year after year, the disarming field never rested. Maintenance teams ensured its power flow and synchronization. Renaissance-like creativity flourished, from the revival of ancient crafts to cutting-edge inventions in green technology and space travel. Literature soared with tales of personal struggles unclouded by gunfire, exploring the complexity of human connection in a world absent the looming threat of warfare. Science expanded as well, fueling breakthroughs in energy, environment, genetics, and beyond. Disagreements arose, of course, but each ended in negotiations or, at worst, scuffles that technology could not transform into mass killing. Eventually, the day arrived when contact with an extraterrestrial civilization became more than a possibility. An alien vessel drifted into Earth's solar system, scanning for intelligence on the third planet from the Sun. The governments of Earth, unified under the new cooperative frameworks, decided to greet the visitors calmly. No warships soared out to meet them. Instead, a small delegation of scientists, diplomats, and philosophers boarded a non-weaponized vessel, safeguarded only by the principle of a global society that had renounced violence. No missiles ready for launch, no energy cannons aimed from orbit. They carried the blueprint of the disarming field as a gift, or a statement of what their civilization stood for. The first conversation would not be, "We come in peace," while brandishing arms, but rather a simple demonstration that they had made war impossible at home. That final leap of faith carried the weight of centuries of warfare, the agony of humankind's past, and yet it was a testament to the promise they had made to themselves on the day without gunfire. They believed that they had found an enduring mechanism to deter violence, freeing them to engage any new realm with open mind. While the outcome of the meeting with the unknown species remained uncertain, the humans knew they represented a planet that had chosen peace, without a fight, without subjugation, protected only by technology that nurtured the sanctity of life. In that singular act of trust, they proved that the darkest shadows of their history did not define them. Back on Earth, the daily hum of civilization continued. Farmers tilled fields that never again faced aerial bombing. Teachers instructed children who never learned the droning sirens of incoming shells. Doctors and nurses unearthed cures instead of treating war wounds. Families became less anxious about tomorrow, focusing on fostering connection and creativity. The world was far from perfect, but it was unscarred by the presence of weapons that once loomed over every horizon. The fascination with destruction finally gave way to an era dominated by dreams of harmony and discovery. And that, in the end, was the greatest triumph of all. The knowledge that a global community, united in preserving life, could achieve what countless treaties and armies could not: a lasting peace, born not out of compulsion, but of a shared resolve to safeguard the future.